Falcons fans were promised change in the 2019 season. A lot of change. They were getting star players back from injury. Dan Quinn, one of the so-called architects of the Legion of Boom, was taking back ownership of the defense, and for the first time in a long time, things were starting to feel like they were getting better. And then they actually had to step on the field. We're 5 weeks into the season now, and unfortunately for the people of Atlanta, nothing has changed, or at least nothing has changed for the better. If anything, Dan Quinn's defense has somehow gotten worse. Opposing completion percentages are up compared to 2018, they're giving up more than a yard extra per passing attempt, their sack percentage and sacks per game are both half of what they were last year, and the average passer ratings of opposing quarterbacks are literally the second highest ever recorded, with only this year's Miami Dolphins standing above them, or below them, depending on how you look at it. In almost every conceivable metric, this Falcons defense, which was already bad, has gotten worse, and it all comes down to coaching. There's talent on this team, lots of talent even, but when you look at the tape, none of that talent is playing cohesively, many of them are making crucial mental errors all over the place, and despite nothing about Dan Quinn's play calling working for the personnel he has, he seemingly refuses to change his style to help them out. For example, the Falcons can almost never generate any pressure with just a four-man rush, which most defensive coordinators would compensate for by calling more blitzes and trying to create confusion in protections. But not Dan Quinn. The Falcons have one of the lowest blitz percentages in the entire league, and only 4 teams have blitzed their linebackers fewer times than Atlanta: the Rams, Packers, 49ers, and Chargers. Quinn opts to have all of his linebackers and defensive backs sit back in coverage instead, while the defensive line wallows about aimlessly, not getting anything done, and as a result, quarterbacks have all day to throw and easily pick apart Quinn's soft zone coverages. Which brings me to my next point, by the way. Quinn will not stop calling zone, despite the fact that his secondary sucks at it. If you're going to run zone coverage most of the time, which the Falcons do, it does not matter how much speed you have, how big you are, or how explosive you are, you will not be effective at it if you don't have 2 very important things going for you: communication and discipline. And so far, Quinn's defensive backs have neither of those. There are constant mental errors and broken coverages in this defense, and at times it seems like nobody is communicating at all on the back end. Take this play from the third quarter of last week's game against Houston, for instance. The Texans are in ace plus personnel, or 12 plus personnel as some coaches call it, which is basically your normal 2 tight end package, except one of the tight ends in the wing is actually an extra offensive tackle, so he's not exactly a real receiving threat. This is usually a personnel grouping and a formation that you run the ball out of, or that you throw a long developing play action pass out of because you can get more time to hold the ball with 6 offensive linemen in protection. The Falcons are responding to this package with a pretty basic cover 3 zone look, and Deshaun Watson can already tell it's cover 3 because of how the defensive backs are aligned. You've got Desmond Trufant sitting in outside leverage outside of a tight end, despite no wide receivers being on his side of the field, and you've got Kamal Ishmael, the strong safety, on DeAndre Hopkins in the slot. Right there, that tells Wilson all he needs to know. A safety on a slot receiver and a cornerback on a tight end is the most surefire red flag for zone coverage you can have. And Watson's suspicion of zone was made even stronger by the fact that Trufant did not shadow Darren Fells across the field when he went in motion. Now, after the snap, I want you to look at how wide open DeAndre Hopkins gets over the middle here, and I want you to see how easy this big first down was to get for Houston, and then we'll roll it back so that I can explain how completely and utterly bullshit it was that Hopkins got that open in the first place. This route should have never had success against this specific coverage call, and it's entirely on the communication errors between 2 people, Trufant and Ricardo Allen, that this catch was even made possible. When Fells motioned away from Trufant's side of the field, he and Allen should have immediately been talking to each other and calling for Allen to cheat down low over the middle, because once Fells was gone, there was nobody for Trufant to cover. The extra tackle, Roderick Johnson, was not a receiving threat, and Vic Beasley dropping into the curl flat zone should have been more than enough to protect against any kind of tricky, tackle-eligible pass play to that side of the field, so Trufant was not needed there. Where he was needed, however, was in a rotation to the deep middle to replace Allen as a deep bracket defender so that Allen could come up and play the short to intermediate middle in what's called a jump coverage. We've talked about this several times before on this channel, but just as a quick refresher, in this style of cover 3, if you've got 0 threats on one side of the field, the free safety should not be playing deep because he's only got one side to help now and not 2. He needs to be aggressively jumping the first route that comes into the intermediate middle of the field, and he needs to trust whichever cornerback is freed up to replace him deep. This is aptly called zone replacement or zone rotation. But what we see here on this pass to Hopkins is that no communication is happening. The safety is backing up and playing deep, bracketing nobody. Trufant is dropping to his deep third zone and covering, again, nobody. Hopkins is bending his route to the soft spot over the middle with no safety there to light him up, and pretty much the only Falcons defender on the field who even recognizes what's going on is Deion Jones, but he can't get there in time to do anything about the throw. I mean, I just don't know what to say here. I have no explanation for why these DBs are not talking to each other. The only receiver on that side of the field was an offensive lineman. They've got DBs dropping to nowhere to cover nothing, and it's all just easy for Houston. That's what the most frustrating part about this is for Falcons fans. It's easy. And this is not a new phenomenon. Several times this season, whether it was Trufant or Oliver or even the linebackers, Atlanta's back seven has just looked lost, like they'd never even been taught how to play zone principles before. They weren't mirroring route stems to maintain leverage or force receivers into their bracket help. They weren't tracking routes with their eyes so that they could break on them on time to get to the ball. And on a few third downs, they just didn't even cover some receivers at all, which of course allowed big plays for free. I mean, it's just remarkable how bad it has been. This whole season is one long teaching tape on how not to play defense, and again, that all comes back to Dan Quinn. Desmond Trufant may have given up 5 touchdowns over the last 2 games, and that may be a horrific number, but ultimately it's Quinn's responsibility to teach Trufant how not to give up 5 touchdowns in 2 weeks, and he failed to do that. Let me use the first touchdown that Trufant gave up to A.J. Brown a couple weeks ago as an example, because to me it was a prime case of how a lack of technique and a lack of discipline has totally sunk this defense. It's 1st and 10 early in the first quarter, and Brown is running a little angle route off play action, which should be a rather high percentage throw when the run fake sucks the linebackers up and clears the throwing lane over the middle. It's not usually a play that you expect to score on, but if the defense is bad enough, you certainly can. And the thing to pay attention to here is Desmond Trufant's technique. The Falcons are in man coverage, and Trufant is using a bail technique from press alignment, which is typically only used in zone. And that by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you're going to be using bail technique from press, you better do it right or you're going to get roasted every single time, and Trufant predictably got roasted because he didn't do it right. Before I show you what he did wrong though, let me show you what it looks like when bail is done correctly in a man coverage look, because that's important for context. This is Jair Alexander, one of the best young corners in the league, and also probably the best corner in the game at making bail techniques work in any situation. He's on Taylor Gabriel out wide here, and I'll show you how he still plays man from a zone technique, step by step, because it's truly fascinating and, in my opinion, trend-setting. Off the snap, Alexander flashes a jam and then pulls it back because he wants to stun Gabriel a little bit and make him react, and his first step off of that jam is back and to the inside. That naturally opens up his hips to the inside, which is called a zone turn. Now, in traditional trail technique in man coverage, the corner's next step would be with his outside foot, back and to the outside to help him square up with the receiver releasing down the boundary so that he could then easily turn and run with him and slide into his hip pocket down the field. But Alexander doesn't do that. He continues opening up to the inside and shuffles back, almost like he's playing zone, while putting his eyes in the backfield. And this accomplishes 3 things. 1, if the route is a quick hitter to the inside like a slant, his hips are already pointed that way so he can just drive on it quickly and break it up 9 out of 10 times. 2, it gives him a quick second with his eyes in the backfield to read his run keys and see if he needs to disengage from the route to come down and help contain the run. And 3, it lets him check Mitch Trubisky's drop and Mitch's eyes during that drop. If he sees Trubisky already looking at him and starting his throwing motion, then he knows it's a quick route like an out or a hitch, and he can just break on it all the way while looking at the ball. But if Trubisky is not looking at him, then he knows that his man is likely running a deeper route that takes longer to develop, and he needs to turn and run down the field. So to recap, Alexander opens up inside, checks Trubisky's eyes and checks his run keys at the same time and sees no running play and no quick throw to his side, which means he needs to quarter turn yet again back over the top to locate his receiver so that he can then slide back into his hip pocket and secure the deeper route. That is how you play bail technique in a man coverage call. and as you can see, it certainly has its benefits and its uses when it's employed in the right place at the right time. But on that A.J. Brown touchdown catch, this was not the right place nor the right time to use bail. Look at Brown's split here in the formation. He's way inside the numbers, not anywhere near the boundary, which gives him essentially a two-way go, either inside or outside. He can take this route anywhere he wants to, and Trufant has no immediate help from the sideline to rely on. When Alexander uses bail and man coverage technique, he only does it outside the numbers because that way, when he takes his eyes off the route as he's bailing, he knows there's really only a limited amount of space outside of his vision that the receiver can go before he turns back around to relocate them. But with Trufant, when you take your eyes off a receiver that is lined up with a reduced split, with essentially an entire half of the field to work with, he doesn't know where Brown is going to go. Like I said, he can take that route anywhere and have all sorts of space to separate, so right from the jump, Trufant is playing catch-up. He doesn't have time to shuffle or to gather information with his eyes. He needs to bail deep, and bail deep now, because there's way too much space for him to try to protect. And when you're forced to literally turn around and sprint ahead of a receiver just because you're in panic mode before the ball's even snapped, you've got no shot. You cannot run press bail technique inside the numbers because you've got no shot of defending a two-way go with tons of space to work with when you can't even look at the route. I have no idea what Trufant was thinking here trying this technique in this situation, and it ended up giving Brown so much separation that he was able to catch this ball uncontested and run essentially untouched for 55 yards and the score. This right here, this lack of discipline and technique, is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the Falcons are poorly coached on defense. Desmond Trufant didn't used to be a liability. He didn't used to give up 5 touchdowns in 2 games. Early in his career, before the current coaching staff showed up, he was one of the most promising young corners in the game. In his first 2 seasons in 2013 and 2014, he looked like he was on the fast track to the Falcons' Ring of Honor, and you can go back and watch one of my very early episodes on him locking up Odell Beckham for proof on that. He was damn good, but now I don't even know if he's going to be on the team next year. Despite their talent level, this entire defense has regressed year after year. The corners are worse, the safeties are worse, the linebackers other than Deion Jones are worse, and the pass rush, which was abysmal last year, is somehow even more flaccid than it already was. To say that this team is disappointing is a monumental understatement because this roster should be fighting for a Super Bowl. Pound for pound, the talent on this team is just as good as the 49ers, the Saints, the Eagles, or really any of the other NFC heavyweights. And sometimes that talent alone can carry them to victory, like we saw a few weeks back against Philly. But for the rest of Atlanta's games where the stars don't take over and do it all by themselves, there is this inescapable feeling that Dan Quinn is wasting this team. I'm not even a Falcons fan and I'm still disgusted by what I'm seeing. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't have to make an episode about basic cover 3 principles and basic man coverage techniques for a defense that has been in this system for 5 seasons now. It's asinine that I even have to say all of this, but I do. The Atlanta Falcons are a badly coached football team, and their players deserve better. Their scouts and front office personnel that found all of those players deserve better. And obviously, most importantly of all, the fans that put up with this shit year after year deserve better. This city was promised change in 2019, but so far it's only been more of the same. I can only hope, for Atlanta's sake, that that promise will be delivered on soon, because if it's not, you can bet a hell of a lot more change will be on the way. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and of course, thank you once again to our season-long sponsor, MyBookie, for helping to make this show possible for yet another season. If you've been thinking about dipping your toes in the waters of sports betting this year to make your Sundays more interesting, and if you want to potentially double your earnings from those bets while minimizing risk to yourself, check out MyBookie because all film room viewers can get a huge 100% sign-up bonus with promo code Brett at the link in the description below. That sign-up bonus will essentially double your deposit so that you can double your bankroll, and if you keep racking up wins with that doubled bankroll, obviously you'll double your winnings as well. And if you lose with that deposit bonus, it also minimizes your risk because, hey, it was free house money anyway, so if you lose, it didn't really come out of your pocket anyway. It's a great deal that benefits you in multiple ways, especially if you just keep winning throughout the season and go on a hot streak. And again, all it takes is just checking out the site at the link below and entering promo code Brett on sign up. As for me, I'll be back, I guess either tomorrow or potentially the day after that with another picks against the spread breakdown video. And I will toot my own horn a little bit and say that I've gotten 4 out of those 6 right this season, which is a pretty good rate for handicapping. I think the ideal handicap rate's like 55%. I'm sitting at 66, so we're on a little bit of a roll there. So we'll see if we can keep that going again into this weekend. And next week, of course, I'll have another Film Room episode coming out as well. Topic to be determined, obviously, because I'll have to see how the games play out on Sunday. And yeah, that's about it for news and notes. Hope you guys like the show, and I'll be back soon. Until then, later.